welcome you. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a topic that touches nearly every aspect of our lives, from the day weather outside our window to the stability of our personal finances and, well, the future of our communities.
Yeah.
We're talking about the multifaceted risks of climate change to the United States. We've got a really comprehensive report from the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO. It expertly synthesizes a huge amount of scientific and economic research. And alongside that, a really fascinating article from Nature that highlights the ongoing scientific discourse, even debate, around some of these very issues.
That's right. Our mission today is really to cut through some of the noise,
Yeah.
to distill the most important and maybe surprising insights from these sources, and to help you understand not just the projections and the profound uncertainties, which we'll definitely talk about, but also the very real, tangible implications of climate change. We're talking impacts on everything, from our national economy, real estate markets, to human health, even national security. It's a complex landscape, often pretty overwhelming.
It is.
But we'll unpack it together, try to make sense of the data, and explore what it truly means for you.
Okay, let's unpack this. We'll begin by sort of grounding ourselves in the evolving climate landscape, looking at the physical projections and those critical, unquantifiable uncertainties that really keep scientists up at night.
Yeah, those are key.
Then we'll pivot to the direct economic ramifications, digging into impacts on our GDP, before exploring surprising, often overlooked details of how climate change is already impacting financial markets, from your home value to federal spending. Finally, we'll broaden our scope to the profound societal consequences, touching on human health, the critical issue of biodiversity, potential shifts in human migration, and even national security. And we'll wrap up by looking at the fascinating and sometimes contentious scientific discourse surrounding these very reports. So let's start at the beginning with the foundational science. What does the Congressional Budget Office report tell us about the physical changes we can expect in the climate through the end of the century? What are the key temperature projections? And maybe most importantly, how certain are they?
Well, what's fascinating here is how the CBO report doesn't just give us one number.
Right.
Instead, it leverages a range of climate scenarios. These scenarios reflect different assumptions about future global policies, ones already in place to curb emissions, along with socioeconomic factors like, population growth, tech development.
Okay.
To put things in perspective, since the late 1800s, average global temperatures have already increased by about 1.3 degrees Celsius.
Already 1.3 degrees.
Yeah. Looking at 2100, the CBO's central estimate for global warming, relative to that 1850-1900 pre-industrial baseline, is roughly 3 degrees Celsius.
3 degrees.
3 degrees Celsius. And this is based on projections from the IPCC, that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
Right, the big international body.
Exactly. Thousands of scientists assessing climate change, providing these comprehensive reports to policymakers worldwide. But, and this is really crucial, we need to grasp the profound uncertainty around these projections. The report clearly states there's a 5% chance warming could actually exceed 4 degrees Celsius.
4 degrees. Wow.
Yeah, a scenario with potentially catastrophic implications. And equally, there's a 5% chance it could be less than 2 degrees Celsius.
Okay.
Which would suggest, maybe more effective mitigation efforts are working or climate sensitivity is lower than we thought. This wide range really highlights the spectrum of potential futures. And these futures are influenced not just by the physical processes, but also by future societal changes, population levels, economic growth, how we use our land.
So our choices matter here.
Absolutely. The CBO's analysis, specifically, it factors in global climate policies up to 2020 and the U.S. 2022 Reconciliation Act. So these projections are based on our current policy trajectories.
Got it.
It's a reminder that, further, more aggressive actions to reduce emissions could indeed shift that projected range downwards, potentially altering our future.
So we're talking about global averages, like that 3-degree central estimate. But what does this all mean for the United States specifically? Does this warming happen evenly across the country, or are some regions going to feel it, more intensely?
No, not at all. It's a critical nuance, often overlooked.
Okay.
The report clarifies that within the contiguous United States, temperature increases tend to be greater in cooler times and places.
Cooler times and places. How does that work?
So think nights warming more than days, or winters warming more than summers. While you might feel the heat more intensely during, say, a summer afternoon peak,
Right.
the increase in temperature might actually be more pronounced at night or during the winter months. This affects things like energy grids, agriculture, snowpack.
Ah, okay.
And geographically, northern regions and inland areas, particularly the west and south, are projected to warm more significantly than coastal areas.
Why is that?
It's largely because oceans absorb and store a tremendous amount of heat. They act like massive thermal batteries.
Right.
That moderates temperatures on nearby land, creating a buffer that inland areas just don't have. Think about how coastal cities, like San Francisco, often have milder temperatures than inland cities at the same latitude.
Yeah.
That effect will continue and likely even amplify.
Okay, so beyond just temperature, another critical element facing dramatic shifts is water. We hear about too much, too little, often in the wrong places. What are we seeing in terms of shifts in rainfall and rising sea levels?
Precisely. And water is, fundamental. The CBO report confirms that as a result of climate change, average rainfall over lands is increasing, and it's doing so at an accelerating rate.
Okay, more rain overall.
Yes, but it's not just about more rain overall. It's also that heavy rain events, those intense downpours, are becoming more frequent and more intense in most regions of the country.
Right, like those flash floods we keep seeing.
Exactly. Flash floods devastating communities that maybe historically weren't considered high risk. However, and this is a key point, it's not uniform. The southwest and parts of Texas are actually projected to experience modest declines in precipitation.
So drier conditions there.
Yeah, which obviously brings its own profound set of challenges, particularly for water resources, agriculture, and increasing the risk of drought and water scarcity for millions of people.
Okay, and sea levels. That's the other big water story.
Absolutely. When we talk about sea levels, the CBO projects an average U.S. sea level rise of about 3 feet by 2100.
3 feet.
3 feet relative to 2005 levels under their central warming estimate. But again, there's that range reflecting the uncertainty.
Right, 5% chances.
Exactly. There's a 5% chance of 4 feet or more and a 5% chance of 2 feet or less.
And does that rise happen evenly along the coasts?
No, that's another important point. These changes won't be uniform across U.S. coastlines at all. Regional variations are significant.
Like where?
Well, the western Gulf Coast, for instance, is seeing some of the largest projected increases, potentially up to 5 feet.
5 feet? Why so much more there?
It's due to a combination of factors, including land subsidence. The land itself is actually sinking in some of those areas.
Wow, okay.
Conversely, the Pacific Northwest is expected to see the smallest increase in the contiguous U.S., maybe 1.0 to 2.5 feet in the same scenario. And what's truly sobering, is that even if global temperatures somehow stabilize by 2100, which is a big if.
Yeah.
The expansion of warming oceans and the continued melting of glaciers and ice sheets mean that sea levels will continue to rise for centuries after that.
So it's baked in to some extent.
A significant amount of future rise is already baked in, yes.
Right.
This is not a problem that simply stops on a given date.
Okay. It sounds like this intricate dance of physical changes, rising temperature, shifting rain, rising seas will inevitably fuel more natural disasters. Right?
They absolutely will.
Yeah.
And the feedback loop is clear. Climate change fuels disasters, which then feed back into economic and societal costs. It's a cycle.
Explain that cycle.
Well, the interplay of higher sea levels, more intense storm surges, think bigger waves pushed further inland during storms, and heavier rainfall is expected to make floods both more frequent and more extreme.
Okay.
For instance, the CBO projects that flood damage could increase by a quarter to a third by 2050, solely due to climate change.
No,
It's not even counting increased development in risky areas.
Just the climate impact alone.
It's just the climate impact. And this isn't just about homes. It includes critical infrastructure, roads, power lines, businesses, farmland, public services. It causes these cascading disruptions that ripple through local economies. And a growing share of the damage to homes with mortgages is expected to occur in coastal areas, as these regions get hit by both sea level rise and more intense storms.
A double whammy.
Exactly. And then beyond floods, you have hotter, drier conditions in certain parts of the U.S., directly increasing wildfire risk.
We're seeing that already, aren't we?
Absolutely. The amount of land burned by wildfires has already doubled over the past 30 years.
Doubled.
Yeah. The increased temperatures dry out vegetation, turning forests into tinderboxes. It makes fire more likely to start, easier to spread, and burn with devastating speed and intensity. It could even induce more lightning strikes, which are a common ignition source. So it creates this dangerous cycle.
But predicting wildfires is harder than floods.
Yes. Predicting future wildfire risk is notoriously difficult.
Yeah.
There's a complex human role in both starting fires, often accidentally, and in stopping them. Firefighting efforts, land management practices. These all play a huge role. So wildfire models tend to be less reliable than flood models, which adds another layer of uncertainty we have to deal with.
Here's where it gets really interesting and maybe a bit unsettling. The CBO report also brings up tipping points. Can you explain what those are and why they're so profoundly important, especially with all this uncertainty about exactly when they might occur?
Right, tipping points.
Mm.
This raises an important question that delves into the truly fundamental shifts within our climate system.
Okay.
Tipping points are precisely these critical thresholds. Imagine a point where a relatively small amount of additional warming could trigger a large, often irreversible shift to a very different state.
Like pushing something over the edge.
Exactly. Think of it like bending a stick. It flexes gradually, it absorbs pressure, but at a certain point, snap. It breaks completely and irreversibly.
And you can't unsnap it.
You can't unsnap it.
Right.
There's no going back easily, if at all, once that threshold is crossed. What makes them so crucial and, frankly, worrying is the unprecedented nature of these projected warming levels in recorded human history.
We haven't been here before.
We haven't. So their full effects are poorly understood and highly uncertain. We're talking about potentially fundamentally altering the planet we inhabit, often with unknown chain reactions. The CBO highlights three main types of processes with potentially major impacts if they cross these thresholds.
Okay, what are they?
First, greenhouse gas and temperature feedbacks. These involve natural features of the Earth that respond to warming by releasing additional greenhouse gases.
So warming causes more warming.
Precisely. A dangerous positive feedback loop. A prime example is permafrost.
Right, the frozen ground in the Arctic.
Exactly. It's a mix of perennially frozen soil and rock found in vast regions, and it holds nearly twice as much carbon as the entire atmosphere.
Twice as much, wow.
Yeah, much of it in the form of methane, which is a much more potent heat-trapping gas than CO2, especially in the short term.
Okay.
As permafrost thaws, which it's already doing, its immense stores of organic matter decompose and release both CO2 and methane into the atmosphere.
So it's like a ticking time bomb releasing more gas.
In a way, yes. While gradual thawing is ongoing, studies suggest critical thresholds exist maybe between 1.0 and 2.3 degrees C warming, where regional thawing could really accelerate.
How much accelerate?
Increasing emissions by maybe 50% more than gradual thawing alone over a few centuries. And then more extensive warming, say 3.6 degrees C, could even lead to widespread burning of permafrost, releasing hundreds of gigatons of CO2 over decades or centuries.
Hundreds of billions of tons.
Yes. For context, 200 gigatons is enough to add roughly 0.2 to 0.4 degrees C additional warming globally, so it speeds everything up.
Okay, that's permafrost. What else in this category?
Similarly, the Amazon rainforest, often called the lungs of the earth because it absorbs so much carbon,
Right.
it's projected to become drier and more vulnerable to dieback.
Dieback.
Yeah, a self-sustaining process where much of the forest dies off and gets replaced by drier savanna.
Oh, wow.
This could release up to 200 gigatons of CO2. That's like 5 years of current global fossil fuel emissions.
5 years worth just from the Amazon potentially flipping.
Potentially. The warming needed for this is uncertain. Maybe 2.6 degrees C, and the interaction between the Amazon and ocean patterns like the AMOC we'll talk about makes it even more complex.
Okay, so that's feedbacks. What's the second type of tipping point?
Second, changes to ocean circulation and weather patterns. The big one here is the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, or AMOC.
The Gulf Stream is part of that, right?
Exactly. The Gulf Stream is a key part. The AMOC is this crucial system, like a massive conveyor belt. It carries warm water north to the Atlantic and colder, denser water southwards.
And that affects climate.
Hugely. Its collapse, which has happened repeatedly in the distant past.
It has.
Oh, yes. Most recently, about 13,000 years ago. It led to dramatic shifts in regional temperatures and precipitation globally.
Yeah.
Its collapse could be triggered by as little as 1.4 degrees C or maybe as much as 8 degrees C of warming. Big uncertainty there.
What would happen if it collapsed?
Well, it wouldn't just affect ocean temperatures. It could significantly alter weather patterns across North America and Europe. Potentially much colder winters in Europe, changes in monsoon rains in Africa and Asia, major disruptions.
Is that likely soon?
The IPCC says a full collapse is unlikely this century. But the AMOC has undeniably weakened in recent decades.
It has weakened.
Yes. And its future trends remain highly uncertain because it's hard to tell how much of this weakening is just natural variability versus the impact of recent warming from human activity.
Okay, so AMOC is the second one. What's the third?
Third, the melting of ice sheets. We're talking here about the colossal Greenland and West Antarctic ice sheets.
Huge amounts of ice.
Massive. Together, they hold enough water to raise global sea levels by over 60 meters, or about 200 feet, if they melted entirely.
200 feet.
If they melted entirely, yes. Now, currently, they're melting at an accelerating rate. While only a small fraction of their ice has melted so far, with sufficient warming, maybe as little as 1 to 3 degrees C, these ice sheets could reach critical thresholds that cause their complete and irreversible disintegration.
Irreversible disintegration.
Yes, leading to approximately 30 feet of sea level rise, but over centuries to millennia. It's not instantaneous.
Okay, 30 feet over a long time, but still.
Catastrophic eventually. And even parts of the much larger eastern Antarctic ice sheet, which holds most of the world's ice, could begin to melt with 2 degrees C to 6 degrees C of warming.
Wow.
Its complete disintegration would need more like 6 degrees C to 10 degrees C and take thousands of years, but the process could start much sooner.
Is there a risk of faster melt this century?
While the full effect takes a long time, the risk of rapid ice loss by 2100, maybe leading to 5 feet or more of sea level rise just from the ice sheets, that risk is also present, albeit highly uncertain.
So that 3-foot average estimate could be low if this happens faster.
It could be significantly low if one of these rapid ice loss scenarios plays out. The CBO notes these thresholds are uncertain. Estimates will keep changing as science improves, but the potential for massive, irreversible change is real.
So these aren't just incremental changes. They're potential fundamental shifts that are hard to predict because we haven't seen them in recorded history. That's a truly sobering thought. Okay, with those physical changes and the, frankly, daunting concept of tipping points in mind, what does the CBO report tell us about the direct economic consequences for the United States? How will this affect our gross domestic product, our GDP?
Yeah, the CBO's analysis here is quite illuminating and pretty sobering. Their central estimate is that climate change will reduce U.S. real GDP by 4% by 2100.
4% lower than it would be otherwise.
Exactly, compared to a scenario where temperatures stabilize after 2024. To put that 4% in perspective on 2023's GDP, that would be roughly $1.1 trillion.
$1 trillion a year, basically.
Roughly, yeah. But here's where it gets truly unsettling.
Yeah.
The range of potential outcomes is incredibly wide, again, reflecting that profound uncertainty.
Okay, what's the range?
There's a 5% chance GDP could be a staggering 21% lower.
21%?
21% lower. That would be a monumental $5.7 trillion loss in 2023 terms.
That's hard to even comprehend. What would that look like?
It's not just a recession. It's a fundamental economic restructuring. It could make the 2008 financial crisis look like a ripple. It would impact every sector, every job, every household in ways we've just never had to adapt to on a national scale.
Okay, that's the bad end. What's the other end?
On the other end of the spectrum, there's an equal 5% chance GDP could be 6% higher.
Higher. How could climate change make GDP higher?
Primarily if certain potential benefits, like maybe significantly reduced cold-related mortality and lower heating costs in some areas, end up outweighing the negative impacts. Or if significant technological adaptations emerge that boost productivity.
But that's less likely.
The overall message is that it's much more likely to decrease GDP than increase it. The downside risks are substantial.
Okay.
And the CBO estimates are based on historical relationships between temperature and economic output. They acknowledge these projections don't fully account for effects of things with no historical precedent.
Like the tipping points.
Exactly. Like tipping points. Meaning the true extent of damage could be even greater and more unpredictable than even that wide range suggests.
That's an incredibly wide range from a huge loss to a potential gain. What factors account for such a vast difference in projections, and what are the primary ways, the mechanisms through which climate change is expected to hit our overall economic output?
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, climate change impacts 3 key determinants of economic output: labor supply, productivity, and capital stock. The range reflects big uncertainties in how these will play out and interact.
Okay, let's take those one by one. Labor supply.
First, labor. We'll see more lost workdays due to high temperatures and natural disasters.
Makes sense. Too hot to work outside.
Exactly. Think about construction workers, agricultural laborers, trying to do their jobs safely and efficiently outdoors in extreme heat. Their output capacity just drops. A construction site might have to shut down entirely for a day or shift to night work, which has its own costs and challenges.
Right.
While there might be some offset from fewer workdays lost to cold temps or winter storms in some regions.
Maybe.
But the overall expectation is that increases in lost workdays due to heat and disasters will significantly outweigh any decreases. leading to a smaller, effective labor supply.
And it's not just physical work.
No. Studies suggest even cognitive performance can decline in extreme heat. So office workers, decision-making, that can be affected too.
Okay, so that's labor supply shrinking. What about productivity?
Second, productivity. Labor productivity, meaning output per hour worked, is expected to decline overall.
Related to the heat stress.
Directly related to the impact on outdoor workers, yes, but it extends further. The private sector faces increased production costs from various factors. For example, there's a higher demand for air conditioning.
Right, energy costs go up.
Higher energy consumption and costs. Imagine a data center needing massively more cooling, or a pharmaceutical manufacturer needing much more precise temperature control for sensitive products. Costs go up.
Okay.
Beyond that, direct damage to critical infrastructure roads, bridges, ports, power grids disrupts supply chains and raises costs for all businesses.
Yeah, if the trucks can't run.
Exactly. While some areas might see modest savings in heating costs, these are generally expected to be swamped by the increases elsewhere. And agricultural land productivity is also expected to decline overall.
Even with longer growing seasons in some places.
Even with that, the benefits from longer growing seasons are often offset by extreme temperatures, worse droughts, pressure on water supplies, and an increased prevalence of crop pests and diseases that thrive in warmer conditions.
Okay, labor, productivity. What's the third one? Capital.
And third, capital stock. Natural disasters, floods, wildfires, hurricanes directly destroy physical capital. Factories, homes, public infrastructure. In the short run, if a factory is destroyed, it just can't produce. That's an immediate loss of productive capacity hitting GDP.
Okay.
And even if this lost capital is eventually replaced, think about rebuilding after a hurricane.
Yeah.
Those investments divert funds that could have been used for new, truly productive investments that would otherwise expand our economic capacity.
So you're just replacing what you lost, not adding anything new.
Exactly. So over the long run, the increased risk of capital loss reduces the expected returns on investments. Investors see more risk, so they might invest less overall, which further diminishes the capital stock and, in turn, our future GDP.
Can adaptation help here, like building stronger bridges?
Absolutely. Adaptations like investing in more resilient infrastructure or new technologies can moderate these effects and are crucial for future stability. But they also come with significant upfront costs and can crowd out other potentially productive investments in the near term. It's a trade-off.
And the CBO even notes that GDP itself isn't like a perfect measure here, right? It doesn't tell the whole story of climate change's economic impact.
That's such an important nuance, and the CBO wisely acknowledges the limitations of GDP as the sole measure of economic activity when we're talking about climate change.
Why? What does it miss?
Well, first, GDP only measures output within U.S. borders, so it doesn't fully capture the economic impacts of climate change on our global trade partners
Right.
or on U.S.-owned foreign assets. If climate change severely impacts, say, a major supplier country, causing their economy to falter, that ripple effect on U.S. exports or imports won't be fully reflected in our GDP figures.
And we trade a lot.
A huge amount. In 2023, U.S. exports were about $3 trillion, imports nearly $4 trillion, and Americans held a staggering $36 trillion in foreign assets as of mid-2024. Impacts on those foreign assets wouldn't show up in GDP, but rather in gross national product, which measures American income wherever it's earned.
Okay, so global impacts aren't fully captured. What else?
Another crucial point is that GDP doesn't account for the loss of what economists call non-market goods or ecosystem services.
Things nature provides for free.
Essentially, yes. Things like clean air, clean water, healthy biodiversity, stable ecosystems. They are essential for our long-term well-being and economic function, but they don't have a direct dollar value counted in GDP.
So if a forest burns down,
If a national park is destroyed by wildfire, the economic loss of its natural beauty, its recreational value, its ecological services, like filtering water, that isn't directly measured in GDP, even though it's a profound loss to society. Nor does GDP directly account for capital destroyed by disasters. In fact, and this sounds ironic, investments made to rebuild after a disaster are counted in GDP.
So a hurricane could technically boost GDP?
In that narrow sense, yes. The rebuilding activity gets counted, which can overstate the extent to which those investments truly improve the economy rather than just replacing what was tragically lost. GDP is a measure of activity, not necessarily well-being or true capital preservation.
Got it. Let's shift to something very tangible for many listeners: real estate and financial markets. How is climate change already putting properties and our entire financial system at risk? This sounds like something that could genuinely affect people's portfolios, their savings.
Oh, absolutely. The risks here are substantial and alarmingly widespread. They touch property owners, mortgage lenders,
Yeah.
insurance companies, and even the federal government in a big way.
Okay, give us some numbers. How bad could it get for property?
The CBO estimates that if U.S. sea levels rose by approximately 4 feet,
Which is possible based on that 5% chance.
right, within the range of possibilities, about $930 billion in residential property would be routinely flooded,
Routinely flooded. Like how often?
potentially twice per month. Think king tides becoming regular flooding events.
Wow. $930 billion? How much is that relative to the total?
It's about 2% of the current total value of U.S. residential real estate. Even a 2-foot rise, which is closer to the central estimate, could put $250 billion at risk of routine flooding.
Okay, 2% sounds small nationally, but
Exactly. While it's a small percentage of total property value nationwide, these losses are highly concentrated along the coasts,
right.
meaning they can have absolutely devastating effects on local economies, household wealth, and the very fabric of coastal communities. And continued development in low-lying coastal areas only makes this worse.
We're still building there.
We are. It could potentially double the number of U.S. residents at risk of inundation by 2100 and increase future flood damage costs as much as or more than climate change itself. We're essentially building right into the path of future harm.
Okay, that's flooding. What about wildfires?
Wildfires are also a massive and increasing concern. Over the past decade, roughly 2 million properties have faced at least a 1% chance of damage from wildfires each year.
2 million properties a year at risk.
Annually, yes, with average costs around $10 billion per year just from wildfires. And these aren't just one-off events, they're becoming a chronic drain.
And the projections?
One study cited by the CBO suggests that with 4 degrees Celsius of global warming, wildfire damage could be 10 times greater than current levels.
10 times.
10 times. And 5 times greater with 3 degrees Celsius of warming. And these estimates, based on 2010 home prices, likely understate the current risk.
Why?
Because of continued development in wildfire-prone areas, that wildland-urban interface, and the increasing intensity of fire seasons we've already seen.
Okay, so if properties are losing value or being destroyed by floods and fires, where does that risk ripple out to? What does this all mean for property owners, mortgage lenders, insurers, the government?
It means significant financial exposure across the board. It's truly a complex web of interconnected vulnerabilities.
Let's break it down. Start with property owners.
Okay, for property owners, many are shockingly uninsured for floods.
Really? Don't mortgages require flood insurance in flood zones?
They do in the official high-risk zones, the SFHAs. But many people misunderstand their standard policies. More than half of homeowners surveyed wrongly believe their regular policy covers floods. It doesn't. And even in those high-risk zones, only about 20% of properties actually had flood insurance in 2023.
Only 20%?
Yes, leaving a vast number of homeowners vulnerable to complete financial ruin after a major flood.
And the flood maps themselves?
Even the FEMA flood maps, which are meant to indicate current risk, are updated infrequently. And critically, they don't provide information about future risk increases due to climate change.
So they give a false sense of security?
Potentially, yes. And then there's the question of whether current home prices fully reflect these future climate risks. The evidence is mixed.
How so?
Some studies show discounts for properties in more immediate danger, like a 15% discount for homes facing tidal flooding with just a 1-foot sea level rise. But other studies found no discount at all for properties at risk from a much higher 6-foot sea level rise.
So the market isn't fully pricing it in yet?
It suggests not, especially the longer-term risks. And if prices don't reflect this risk now, future devaluations could be substantial and potentially abrupt, especially if a large natural disaster suddenly shifts homebuyers' perceptions of risk overnight.
Okay, so homeowners are exposed. What about mortgage lenders?
Mortgage lenders face risks of increased defaults if properties lose value or are damaged, especially if those losses are concentrated geographically in their portfolio.
Right, if the collateral value drops.
Exactly. We're already seeing some adaptation from banks charging higher interest rates, demanding lower loan-to-value ratios for riskier properties.
So shifting the risk to borrowers.
Shifting some risk, yes, and potentially restricting access to credit for lower-income individuals in those areas.
Yeah.
But a significant portion of this risk is also transferred elsewhere.
Where?
To federal entities like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
Ow.
Lenders strategically sell off climate-exposed mortgages to them through securitization. Local mortgage lenders in particular seem to do this more than larger, more diversified lenders.
So they offload the riskiest loans onto the government-backed entities.
It appears so, effectively pushing more of that concentrated risk onto the federal government, which acts as a backstop. Investors in mortgage-backed securities also face growing risks. For example, if homeowners prepay mortgages using insurance payouts after disasters, forcing reinvestment at potentially lower rates and disrupting financial models.
Okay, so homeowners, lenders, what about insurance providers? They must be feeling this.
Oh, absolutely. Insurance providers are reacting to mounting losses from natural disasters, averaging $120 billion annually over the past 5 years.
$120 billion a year in losses.
Yes, so they're raising premiums, particularly in disaster-prone areas. But in some states like California or Florida, regulators limit how much premiums can increase to try and keep insurance affordable.
Which sounds good for homeowners, but...
But it causes insurers to restrict availability or even pull out of markets entirely. We're seeing that happen.
Right, leaving homeowners struggling to find coverage.
Exactly. Or forcing them into state-run insurer of last resort programs, which are often underfunded and financially shaky themselves. Furthermore, government subsidies for flood insurance, mainly through the National Flood Insurance Program, NFIP, they prevent premiums from accurately signaling the true risk. While the NFIP is phasing out some subsidies under Risk Rating 2.0, limits on annual increases mean it will take until 2037 for 95% of current policies to fully reflect their actual risk.
So it encourages people to stay in risky areas.
It inadvertently incentivizes continued development and occupancy in risky areas by dampening the true cost signal of that risk. It creates a kind of moral hazard.
Okay, which brings us to the federal government. Sounds like a lot of risk ends up there.
And finally, yes, the federal government itself is increasingly seen and acting as the nation's insurer of last resort.
How big is that exposure?
It's so significant that the Government Accountability Office, GAO, has had limiting the federal government's fiscal exposure by better managing climate change risks on its high-risk list since February 2013.
Over a decade. And have they made progress?
The GAO has repeatedly noted little measurable progress in addressing this exposure. They highlight a strategic vacuum and a fundamental lack of data and analytical capacity within federal agencies to even report their climate-related financial risks properly. Federal spending on disaster relief already averages tens of billions annually. And the subsidy cost just for flood damage to federally backed mortgages is projected to rise significantly, maybe by 44% by 2053, reaching about $400 million a year under the central climate estimate.
That's a huge potential burden on taxpayers.
It looms as a massive fiscal burden, especially if disaster damage or rising insurance premiums drive down the prices of undamaged homes in risky areas or increase mortgage prepayment rates. That could potentially trigger broader financial instability.
That seems like a truly massive and growing financial burden. But, okay, what about the economic impacts of trying to solve climate change? The CBO report also mentions transition risks that come with shifting away from fossil fuels.
Yes, this raises an important question, and it's a crucial counterpoint to the physical risks we've been discussing. Policies aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions, while absolutely necessary for mitigating long-term climate damage, they introduce their own set of economic and financial transition risks.
Like what?
The most prominent example is stranded assets.
Stranded assets.
These are primarily fossil fuel reserves, oil, natural gas, coal that may need to remain unburned, left in the ground. If global warming targets, like the 2 degrees C limit from the Paris Agreement, are actually met.
So if we stop using fossil fuels, those reserves lose their value.
Exactly. If we're serious about decarbonization, then a significant portion of these reserves effectively become worthless or stranded. The CBO estimates that the immediate unanticipated global adoption and enforcement of a 2 degrees C warming limit in 2024, kind of a shock therapy scenario, could lead to losses for U.S. entities ranging from $430 billion to an astounding $5.5 trillion in present value.
Present value. What does that mean exactly?
It means they're calculating what those future economic hits or the loss of value from unused assets spread out over time would be worth to us today if we had to account for them right now on the balance sheet. It discounts future losses back to their current value.
Okay, so potentially trillions in losses from stranded assets. Who bears those losses?
That's critical. These potential losses would not be evenly distributed at all. The wealthiest 10% of U.S. households would bear about 82% of these losses,
82%. Why so concentrated?
largely because they hold a disproportionate share of investments in fossil fuel companies, either directly through stocks or indirectly through mutual funds and retirement accounts.
Okay. And the government?
Direct losses to the federal government would be relatively small, mainly from lower receipts from leasing federal lands for oil and gas, or maybe a loss in value of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve if oil prices plummet.
And globally?
Globally, these losses from stranded assets could be even more immense, ranging from $1.9 trillion to $24 trillion in present value, according to other studies the CBO looked at.
Why such a huge range there, too?
Again, significant uncertainty. It depends on what assets you count, how you value them now, how their value changes with or without climate policies, plus big assumptions about technological advancements like carbon capture and overall economic growth. It really highlights the delicate balancing act.
Balancing what?
Balancing the need to mitigate future climate damages against the need to manage the economic disruption that comes with the necessary energy transition. It's a huge challenge.
Okay, so we've covered the climate projections and their profound impact on our economy, our financial systems. But climate change touches so much more than just balance sheets, doesn't it? What about human health? How directly will a warming climate impact our well-being?
Yeah, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the health implications are truly profound and extend far beyond just, feeling a bit warmer on average.
Right.
Without further adaptation, the CBO estimates that with 4 degrees Celsius of warming by 2100,
That high-end scenario again.
that high-end scenario, yes, U.S. mortality rates could be 1.5% to 2.0% higher.
1.5 to 2% higher mortality. What does that mean in actual lives?
To put that in starker terms, that's potentially 50,000 to 70,000 additional deaths annually in the U.S. by 2100, just due to heat.
50 to 70,000 deaths a year?
Annually, yes. Imagine a silent epidemic year after year, claiming lives at a rate comparable to, say, kidney disease deaths in 2022, but driven purely by a changing climate.
Wow. Who's most vulnerable?
Older populations are especially vulnerable to extreme temperatures, as their bodies are just less able to regulate heat effectively.
But we have air conditioning, right? Doesn't that help?
It helps tremendously. Adaptations like widespread air conditioning absolutely mitigate this. Studies suggest AC reduced heat's effect on mortality by roughly 90% in the U.S. during the 20th century.
Okay, so adaptation works.
It does, but these adaptations come with substantial costs. One study estimated these costs, including things like energy bills and maybe behavioral trade-offs like staying inside, could total about 1% of GDP annually by 2100 with that 4 degrees C warming.
1% of GDP just for heat adaptation.
Annually, yes. Which, for context, was about $274 billion in 2023. Even with adaptation, people who work outdoors and those without access to air conditioning, particularly lower-income households, will remain highly vulnerable, worsening existing health inequalities.
And for less warming, say 2 degrees C.
For 2 degrees C of warming, the adaptation costs were estimated to be lower, maybe around 0.2% of GDP annually. Still a significant sum, billions of dollars.
And it's not just about heat, is it? Climate change seems to be a multiplier for other health risks, too.
Oh, far from it. Climate change will increase air pollution in several critical ways.
Yeah.
Well, hotter, sunnier conditions actually speed up the chemical reactions that form ground-level ozone, which is the main component of smog.
Okay, more smog.
More smog. And ozone has long-term detrimental effects on the lungs, heart, and immune system, particularly for children, the elderly, and people with asthma.
Right. What else?
Additionally, larger and more severe wildfires, fueled by those hotter, drier conditions. They produce significantly more particulate matter. These are tiny airborne particles, PM2.5, that can penetrate deep into the lungs and even the bloodstream.
And that's bad for health.
Very bad. Wildfire smoke alone is currently estimated to cause somewhere between 6,000 and 30,000 deaths annually in the U.S. right now.
6 to 30,000 now.
Yes, accounting for maybe 0.2% to 0.9% of annual mortality already. And projections indicate a significant increase, maybe annual deaths due to wildfire smoke rising by 51% to 76% by 2050.
Wow. More breathing problems.
More breathing problems, more cardiovascular issues. These impacts on air quality are expected to vary widely by region, with heat and drought-prone states being particularly affected, creating new public health crises.
Anything else on the health front?
Yes, we also expect an expansion of vector-borne diseases.
Meaning illnesses spread by insects.
Exactly. Illnesses spread by insects like mosquitoes and ticks. Think West Nile virus. That could roughly double with 3 degrees C or more of warming, or increase by about 1,000 additional cases per year with 2-3 degrees of warming, according to one study. Lyme disease distribution could shift too.
And mental health.
Beyond physical health, there's even emerging research suggesting an increase in mental illness rates. One study projected suicides potentially rising by 3% if warming reaches 4 degrees C here. It underscores the broad psychological toll of climate change, anxiety, stress, trauma from disasters.
Okay, that's heavy. Beyond human health, how does climate change impact our natural world, our ecosystems, the species around us, and what are the broader economic and societal implications of those shifts?
This leads us to biodiversity, a really foundational element of our planet's health and ultimately our own well-being. Climate change is expected to become the dominant cause of biodiversity loss by 2070,
More than habitat destruction.
surpassing other human activities like agriculture, deforestation, and urbanization as the primary driver.
Why is this so impactful?
Because of the rapid pace of climate zone shifts. Think about the temperature and rainfall conditions that define a habitat. Those zones are projected to shift several hundreds of miles north in North America by the end of the century.
Hundreds of miles.
Yes. And many species simply can't adapt genetically or migrate physically fast enough to keep up. This is particularly challenging for less mobile creatures, like amphibians and reptiles, and for most plant species.
So they get left behind in unsuitable climates.
Essentially, yes.
That
With 4 degrees Celsius of warming, a startling 13% of species could lose over 80% of their suitable habitat range,
13% face near total habitat loss.
which puts them at very high extinction risk. Even with just 2 degrees C of warming, 10% would face such a risk. And the CBO notes, again, that 5% chance that the share of species at very high risk of extinction could be as high as 37%, or as low as 2%. Huge uncertainty, but potentially catastrophic losses.
And economically, why does losing species matter for the economy?
Economically, this is profoundly significant and often really underestimated.
Oh, so.
Well, first, it threatens agriculture. With 4 degrees C warming, over 30% of current U.S. farmland could become climatically unsuitable for growing the crops or raising the livestock we currently rely on there. Although other areas further north might become more suitable, it requires massive shifts.
Right. Affects food prices, food security.
Exactly. Impacts global crop yields, can lead to increased food prices and scarcity, hitting the most vulnerable people the hardest. Beyond that, many essential crops, think cacao, coffee, various fruits and vegetables depend on insects for pollination.
Bees. Right.
Bees, butterflies, other insects.
Wow.
Losses of pollinators due to climate change pose a direct and severe risk to agricultural output and food security for those specific foods.
Okay. Agriculture. What else?
It also affects human health directly. Many prescription drugs are derived from natural compounds, often found in plants or microbes from tropical regions.
Right. Like rainforest plants.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Regions that are highly vulnerable to climate change. Disruption to these delicate ecosystems directly affects the pipeline for future medicines and could significantly drive up U.S. healthcare costs down the line. And critically, biodiversity loss degrades our natural defenses. Coral reefs, for example.
Coral reefs. How do they defend us?
They currently prevent over $1 billion in U.S. flood damage annually by acting as natural breakwaters. They absorb wave energy along many U.S. coastlines.
I didn't know that.
But they face near total loss with just 2 degrees C of warming because they're highly sensitive to changes in ocean temperature and acidity. Losing them means higher flood risks and higher costs for coastal protection. Wetlands are another example, crucial for flood control and water purification.
Okay. What about human movement? Will climate change drive more immigration to the U.S. or even movement within the country as conditions shift?
The CBO projects that, yes, agricultural losses from droughts and increased natural disasters globally are likely to lead to more immigration pressures towards the United States.
From where, primarily?
While other economic and social factors, poverty, conflict, family ties, undeniably play a larger role in migration decisions overall,
Sure.
climate change can significantly amplify these existing drivers, especially from Latin American and Caribbean countries, which are expected to face greater damage from stronger hurricanes as sea levels rise and ocean temperatures increase.
So climate becomes a push factor.
It becomes an added stressor, yes. For example, the report notes a 2 to 3 foot rise in global sea levels could potentially displace as much as 0.5% of the world's population by 2100. Not all will migrate internationally, but some fraction might seek refuge elsewhere.
Have we seen climate migration already?
We've seen immediate migration after major climate-related events. For instance, roughly 4% of Puerto Rico's population moved to the mainland U.S. after Hurricane Maria devastated the island in 2017, seeking refuge and stability.
Right.
However, It's important to note that U.S. immigration policies, geographical barriers, and simply the resources available to potential immigrants will limit the extent of any climate-related increase. It's not an open door.
What about migration within the U.S.?
We also expect increased domestic migration within the U.S. People moving away from high-risk areas,
Like where?
like maybe the Southwest, where declining water resources will increase pressure to migrate elsewhere, or coastal areas facing chronic flooding and rising insurance costs. This internal migration will put its own strain on receiving communities' infrastructure, housing, schools.
Okay. And finally, an area that might surprise some listeners with its direct connection to climate change: national security. How does a warming climate impact that?
This is a really critical point, and one the Department of Defense, the DoD, has been increasingly focused on for years now.
How so?
Climate change is projected to make conflict more likely, particularly by exacerbating resource scarcity fights over dwindling fresh water or arable land.
So it's a threat multiplier.
Exactly. That's the term the military uses. It's expected to increase geopolitical instability and could regrettably draw the U.S. into more conflicts as nations compete for diminishing resources or deal with mass displacements leading to instability.
Any specific examples?
Think about the opening of the Arctic due to melting sea ice.
Right, the Northwest Passage.
Yes. This isn't just an ecological event. It's intensifying competition among global powers, Russia, China, the U.S., for newly accessible shipping lanes and potentially untapped resources like oil and gas. This likely requires an increased U.S. military presence and specialized equipment, like more icebreakers, to assert U.S. interests in a rapidly changing strategic environment.
Okay, so geopolitical competition. What about direct impacts on the military itself?
Beyond conflict, climate change directly impacts military operations and costs. Over 1,700 U.S. military installations are in coastal areas vulnerable to sea level rise and hurricanes.
1,700 bases.
Yes. Bases like Norfolk Naval Station in Virginia, the world's largest naval base, or Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida, which was devastated by Hurricane Michael, they are already facing inundation and extreme weather damage, disrupting operations. Extreme temperatures and natural disasters will disrupt training and testing activities. Think trying to train soldiers in extreme heat. It increases maintenance needs for equipment operating in harsher conditions, raises operating costs for cooling facilities, and can even affect military medical operations through issues like water scarcity at bases or heat-related illnesses among personnel.
So it makes everything harder and more expensive for the military.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Department of Defense itself has acknowledged that almost all of its installations will have greater exposure to various climate hazards by 2085. This requires significant investment in resilience and adaptation, which draws resources away from other military priorities.
Okay. It's clear these impacts, economic, health, environmental security, won't be felt equally, though. The CBO report touches on significant and sobering distributional effects, highlighting profound inequities.
Absolutely. That disparity is truly stark, and it's a critical point that the CBO report highlights quite effectively. Low-income and minority communities are disproportionately exposed to the physical impacts, like floods and extreme urban heat.
Why is that?
It's partly due to historical factors, including housing discrimination, redlining, policies that funnel these communities into less desirable, often flood-prone or industrial areas with fewer environmental amenities.
Right.
They also often face a lack of access to information about risks and simply lack the financial means to afford homes in safer, more resilient areas.
And the urban heat example.
Yeah, low-income urban areas are, on average, 2 degrees hotter than higher-income areas in the same cities.
2 degrees hotter just based on neighborhood income.
On average, yes. It's not just that they're paved over. It's often a combination of dense buildings trapping heat, a severe lack of green spaces, trees, parks which naturally cool the air through evapotranspiration, and the materials themselves, like dark asphalt and concrete, absorbing and re-radiating heat long after the sun goes down. Black and Hispanic people are statistically more likely than white people to live in these intense urban heat island zones.
Making them more vulnerable to the heat health impacts we talked about.
Exactly. More vulnerable to heat-related illnesses and mortality.
And it's not just about exposure, right? It's also about coping and recovery.
Precisely. Beyond mere exposure, these same communities also face greater barriers to adaptation and recovery. They often lack essential resources like adequate insurance coverage or access to credit needed to rebuild after a disaster.
So they get hit harder and have a harder time bouncing back.
Yes. Following natural disasters, Low-income individuals and Black or Hispanic people are more likely to experience prolonged work disruptions, suffer greater proportional property damage relative to their wealth, and even see a decline in their credit scores, trapping them in a cycle of vulnerability.
Are certain regions affected more?
The Southeast, which has the nation's lowest per capita income, is expected to be particularly hard hit by both heat and natural disasters. They face significant projected losses in labor productivity, especially in outdoor industries like agriculture and construction, and higher energy demands for cooling, straining household budgets.
And federal help, does that reach these communities equally?
That's another issue. Federal disaster adaptation projects, like building seawalls or flood control systems, are often screened based on benefit-cost analyses.
Which sounds reasonable.
It sounds reasonable, but it can inadvertently limit their implementation in communities with low property values. If the benefit is calculated based on protecting high-value property, then lower-value areas might not qualify, even if the human need is just as great or greater.
So it can worsen the inequities.
It can essentially lead to disinvestment from the very communities that need help the most, further exacerbating these inequities.
Okay, we've been looking at the CBO's comprehensive assessment, which draws on a broad scientific consensus and paints, well, a rather stark picture overall. But our sources also include this fascinating piece from Nature about a contested report, one that takes a very different stance. Can you tell us about that and why it's generating such a strong reaction?
Yeah, this raises a really important question about how scientific information is presented, how it's interpreted, especially when it enters a politically charged environment, and the crucial role of scientific consensus itself.
Okay.
The Nature article, published just a few days ago, August 7th, 2025, highlights a report released last week by the U.S. Department of Energy, the DOE.
And what did this DOE report conclude?
It concluded that global warming is, quote, less damaging economically than commonly believed.
Less damaging? That's different from the CBO's findings.
It's very different. And what's particularly notable about this report, and drawing a lot of scrutiny, is that it was authored by a small group of 5 scholars who are known to question the scientific consensus on climate change.
Okay.
And they were specifically recruited by the U.S. Energy Secretary, Chris Wright, who himself is a former oil and gas executive.
Ah, that background immediately drew scrutiny, I imagine.
Immediately, yes, from the broader scientific community.
And how has that broader scientific community reacted to this DOE report? Outrage was a strong word used in the Nature article.
The reaction has indeed been one of significant outrage and alarm, and for very specific reasons. Scientists like Jolyn Russell, an oceanographer at the University of Arizona, she called the report awful and explicitly stated it was, quote, designed to suppress science, not to enhance it or encourage it.
Strong words.
Very strong. Benjamin Santer, a highly respected climate scientist who worked at the DOE's Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory for decades. He said he was gobsmacked. He called it a revision of science and a revision of history.
So it's not just seen as a minor academic disagreement?
Not at all. Prominent researchers like Andrew Dessler, an atmospheric scientist at Texas A&M, are actively helping to coordinate efforts among scientists to write short, pointed rebuttals to the specific scientific arguments presented in the DOE report.
They feel they have to respond publicly.
Their consensus is that they simply can't do nothing, as one put it, in the face of what they perceive as a significant misrepresentation of decades of established climate science.
What are their main criticisms of the DOE report's science?
They're arguing that the DOE report's methodology appears to cherry-pick data, relies heavily on outdated economic models, and systematically downplays critical factors like climate feedback loops.
Like the permafrost thaw we discussed.
Exactly. And those non-market damages like biodiversity loss, impacts on clean air and water, things that are central to the scientific consensus and were factored into the CBO's more comprehensive analysis, even with their uncertainties. The critics say the DOE report largely ignores or minimizes these.
So it's not just a difference of opinion on interpretation, it's about the very foundation of the scientific claims being made. What's the larger context for this specific DOE report? Why now, and why are scientists coordinating such a strong, organized response?
That's a critical point. The timing and context are key. The DOE report is widely seen as a direct attempt to provide scientific justification for repealing the Environmental Protection Agency's EPA 2009 endangerment finding.
Remind us what that finding was.
That finding, issued under then-President Barack Obama, concluded formally that greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide threaten public health and welfare. And that finding became the essential legal foundation for significant U.S. emissions regulations enacted since then, like rules curbing emissions from cars and power plants.
Okay.
Now, under President Donald Trump, the EPA is reportedly taking the opposite stance and actively seeking to repeal that 2009 finding.
So this DOE report could be used to support that repeal effort.
Precisely. Scientists understand that their coordinated arguments and rebuttals could heavily influence a legal battle over the endangerment finding, a battle that is very likely to eventually reach the U.S. Supreme Court.
Ah, so the stakes are incredibly high.
Incredibly high.
Yeah.
Their argument is essentially twofold. First, the scientific evidence that supported the endangerment finding was already compelling back in 2009, based on robust research available then.
Okay.
And second, and crucial for their current argument, they assert that this body of evidence is significantly stronger today than it was 16 years ago.
Meaning the science supporting regulation has only gotten stronger.
Exactly. Meaning, in their view, a repeal of the endangerment finding would be scientifically unfounded and run counter to the vast weight of current evidence. This really shows how deeply science and policy are intertwined, and how crucial it is for the scientific community to engage when they feel the facts are being misrepresented.
And what has the DOE itself said in response to these criticisms and the scientific backlash? Have they defended the report?
Well, the DOE declined to address the specific scientific criticisms directly when Nature approached them for the article,
Okay.
which perhaps isn't surprising given the political nature of the controversy. However, a DOE spokesperson did issue a statement saying that the report's authors, quote, represent diverse viewpoints and political backgrounds and are, quote, all well-respected and highly credentialed individuals. They are essentially trying to defend the report's academic legitimacy based on the author's credentials. They also mentioned that the report was internally reviewed within the agency, though the nature of that review wasn't specified, and that it is now open to wider peer review from the scientific community and the general public.
There's a public comment period.
Yes, with a public comment period ending on September 2nd. The authors themselves also provided a written response to Nature. They said they welcome serious scientific comments submitted directly to the DOE.
And they're open to changes.
They emphasized their commitment to a transparent and fact-based dialogue and stated they would modify the report as warranted based on valid critiques received during the comment period. So this whole situation really highlights the ongoing dynamic nature of scientific debate, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The intense scrutiny that such politically significant reports inevitably face, and that direct, often contentious interplay between scientific findings and policy influence, especially when there are such differing perspectives on the interpretation and the ultimate implications of climate science. It's a battle of ideas, data, and influence playing out in real time. #outro. So wow, we've covered a lot today, haven't we?
We really have.
This deep dive has shown us, I think, that the risks of climate change to the United States are just incredibly diverse. They're affecting everything from our fundamental financial stability and critical infrastructure right down to public health and even national security.
Yeah.
The CBO's comprehensive analysis really highlights that wide, often unsettling range of potential economic impacts. It emphasizes the profound uncertainty, yes, but also the very significant downside risks, especially if those critical tipping points we talked about are crossed, potentially leading to irreversible planetary shifts.
And it's so clear that while the scientific consensus on climate change's broad impacts and mechanisms is incredibly strong, you see that underpinning the CBO's report, there are still these intense debates and differing interpretations swirling around, especially when it comes to the specific economic implications and, of course, the policy responses.
Exactly.
We saw that vividly with the contested DE report. It just illustrates how scientific information itself can become a focal point, almost a battleground, in these broader political and economic discussions.
Indeed. And understanding the projections, understanding the complex interplay of all these factors, the feedbacks, the uncertainties, particularly around those potentially irreversible tipping points, is just absolutely crucial for effective decision-making, isn't it?
It has to be.
The sheer scale of potential property damage we discussed, the risks being transferred to mortgage lenders and ultimately the federal government, and those broader societal consequences for health, for biodiversity, for national security. It paints an incredibly complex picture that just demands our attention.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? Given the immense scale and the interconnectedness of these challenges, and clearly the differing viewpoints on their severity and the appropriate path forward, How do we as a society move from understanding these risks to making informed, equitable, and effective decisions? Decisions about mitigating these risks and adapting to what is undeniably an uncertain future, it's a huge question. It requires continuous deep dives like this, real engagement with the evolving data, and critical thinking that tries to cut through the noise. What steps do you think are most crucial given everything we've discussed today? Something to think about.